Mosaic knitting is one of the easiest ways to start incorporating color work into your knitting skill set. It's easy because although we have a lot of different colors and patterns going on in these swatches, only one color is used per row of mosaic knitting. And in this video, I'm going to share with you 5 tips to help you get jump started with mosaic knitting. Before we begin, please note mosaic knitting can be worked with a garter stitch texture, that's knitting every row, or stockinette stitch texture, that's knitting the right side row and purling the wrong side row, or any combination of the two. Let's get started with those tips. In mosaic knitting, slip every slip stitch purlwise. What that means is the right hand needle points down the stitch as though you were about to purl it and slides it over to the right hand needle, from the left hand needle onto the right hand needle. So my right hand needle goes down the stitch as if I were about to purl the stitch, and I slide it over. The reason we slip purlwise is because we want that stitch to maintain its correct seating on the needle for when we work it on the next row. If we were to slip knitwise, the stitch would turn around and twist, but we want our slipped stitches to be nice and straight. So we slip purlwise. And whether you're working stockinette or garter stitch mosaic, it's still a slip purlwise. When working mosaic knitting, the yarn should stay on the wrong side of the work when you're working your slip stitches. So what that means is when you're on a right side row, such as this, your yarn will stay to the back of the work as you slip your stitches. So the yarn is in the back of the work right now. Yarn stays in the back. When you're on a wrong side row, the yarn will come to the front when you're ready to work your slipped stitches. So right now my yarn is in the back for the garter stitch for the knitting. And then here I'm ready for a slip stitch. I bring my yarn to the front, towards me, slip the stitch purlwise, to the back to knit my stitch, and then to the front to slip, or towards me to slip. So the yarn is always held to the wrong side of the work as the stitches are slipped. And what that does is it prevents the yarn from crossing over in front of the stitch on the right side. So if I were to leave my yarn in the back and slip this stitch, all of a sudden I have that strand of teal coming across the pink stitch on the front of the work, and that would hide my beautiful mosaic pattern. So the floats, or the strands between the regular knit stitches over the slips, need to be in the back of the work. So sometimes the back of the work is in front of you, and sometimes it's behind you. Move your yarn accordingly. In mosaic knitting, you'll be working 2 rows in one color and then 2 rows in another color. In order to keep those colors as crisp as possible on the edges of your work, when you begin a new color, you want to pick it up from underneath or behind the old color. So I just finished this darker color here, the teal. I'm going to swing my pink, the lighter color, underneath that teal and behind it. And then I'll begin my row. This ensures that the pink doesn't cross over the edge of the teal and create an untidy edging. Because of all of the slipped stitches that we work with in mosaic knitting, the stitches in mosaic tend to be denser than in other fabrics. So when you slip one stitch in mosaic knitting, or 2 stitches, or 3, or whatever your pattern calls for, when you prepare yourself to knit the next stitch in the working color, try to keep a little bit of extra give on the yarn as it crosses over the slipped stitches. If you were to pull this very tight, that only condenses your fabric more, but leaving a little bit of extra yarn on that float behind the slip stitches will help your fabric settle into itself a little bit more. So just try to keep a bit of a loose hand as you slip your stitches. In mosaic knitting, our pattern is built out of 2 rows of each color, usually a right side row and a wrong side row, or 2 rounds of one color if you're working in the round. Let your second row or second round in any color be guided by what you did on the first round or row. So in this case, here I've got all of these green stitches, and then I have some pink ones, and green and pink. In this row, I don't even need to look at my pattern, the written pattern or the charted pattern, because I know these stitches need to be worked in the green and these ones will be slipped again. So you slip the stitches that were previously slipped on your first row in the second row. So you already have this map laid out for you. This is also a great way to check for errors because you'll only ever be slipping the stitches that are in an opposite color, whether you're on row 1 or row 2. Anytime you slip a stitch in mosaic knitting, it should not be a stitch that was done in your working color. So that's a great way to check for errors. But just so I can demonstrate here, I'm not looking at any pattern. I'm just working all of my teal stitches in teal. And then here, when I get to the pink, I'm going to slip that stitch purlwise. So your first row or round creates a roadmap for you for your second row, where you can work the stitches as they appear in terms of color, where the opposite color, the color that you're not working with, is the one that gets slipped, and the color that you are working with gets either knit or purled, depending on what texture your pattern is calling for.